Going to the phone lines and welcome in SEC Network's Matt Stinchcomb, who will be on call for the Arkansas LSU game tomorrow at 11 a.m. Matt, good morning. Thanks so much for making some time for us, man.
Man, happy to do it. Fired up for some ball. Fingers crossed we're going to see it.
Yeah, no kidding.
I probably think the vibe when you guys are getting your assignments for where you'll be going each week, I'd say that it's been more fun thinking that you'll get to go to Fayetteville than it has been the last two seasons, I'd assume, Matt.
Yeah, you normally would assume that. We don't get to go to hardly any games anymore, I'm afraid. We call our games from a submarine these days, and we're actually at home a lot of these times trying to call it off of monitors because of the craziness, we'll call it, that we find ourselves living in. Grateful we've got games, grateful to get to call them. But I'm a big fan of Fayetteville, great town, and I'm a huge fan of the way the season is going for the Hogs, and especially with Sam Pittman. Being an O-line guy myself, whenever anybody takes a chance on a guy that's an O-line coach by stock and trade and to have this type of success is always fun to see.
Yeah, you're an All-American at Georgia. You won an award for one of the best SEC offensive blockers. So, Matt, really the last couple of games, Arkansas has got it going on offense, and that offensive line, they've had 200-plus rushing yards the last three games. Just watching film from your perspective as a former offensive lineman, what have you seen from this offensive line the last few games?
I think it's helped to have that Clary kid back and kind of knock the rust off. I think that's partially been part of it. So guard to guard, you're better when he's in there. I think Rakeem Boyd finally kind of rounding into form has certainly been a shot in the arm as well, because Traylon Smith, who's kind of was the mainstay, the drumbeat of that run game for the bulk of the first half, the majority of the first half of the season. And now, Rakeem Boyd starting to kind of find his sea legs. I think we did y'all's A&M game, and it really did seem as if he started to come on. Had a good game that game. So that you got multiple contributors in the ground game. Having Clary healthy up front certainly helps quite a bit. And time. This is something that offensive football takes time to certainly settle in. Now, this year is so strange, and I still can't quite put my finger on why defenses have struggled as mightily as they have this year. But for sure, offensive line play and typically rushing, you can't simulate that. There's not a 7-7 on league, 7-on-7 league out there that you can just kind of go out in the parking lot with a football and run routes. It doesn't work in the ground game. You got to block. These backs got to see cuts. You got to learn how to work combinations with the guy next to you. So because of all that, it takes time, it takes reps, it takes live reps. You got to actually have somebody resisting you. You can't just go out there and run routes versus air. And so I think that's part of it. When you see where this run game's starting to emerge, it makes sense from a timeline standpoint.
When you look at Arkansas's numbers, they're last in the league on sacks allowed. We know Bo Pelini's going to send pressure. They're like third in the league on getting sacks. So what gives tomorrow? How does Arkansas block this up, or will they be able to block up LSU? Because I think that's it's one of the keys in the game. Do you think that's one of the obvious keys in the game that will decide the outcome?
Well, it can if you find yourself in third and obvious passing downs a lot. Then that's going to be a difficulty. There's no doubt. Felipe Franks this year is mobile enough. He's not a great runner, but in a lot of ways, he kind of reminds me of Ben Roethlisberger. He's more mobile than Ben, but a lot of tacklers just kind of slide off of him. He'll find a way to just muddy his way through the pocket, scramble forward, probably stagger. Usually he's not making just sick cuts and breaking ankles out there. He usually ends up falling forward, but he's a big dude. Falls forward, you get 3 or 4 yards. Sometimes it's enough for a first. Sometimes it's enough to make it maybe a go for it on a 4th down scenario or a 3rd and manageable. But I think the key more than anything else will be, we hear a lot about first down efficiency in this offense. You want to get going on first down so that you can open things up, jump into your tempo game, get that first down. I think more than anything, it's see if you can't get it to third and manageable, where the playbook isn't so obvious, where you're not thinking about a 5 or 7 step drop, where you can get the ball out, or you can take a shot, but that the playbook's more available to you versus, third and 6 plus, third and 7 plus. I think everybody in the stadium's got a pretty good idea what's coming, and you've got some pretty good rushers. The Ojulari kid for LSU, who's really coming on, good little football player. He can pressure the passer all on his own. So you definitely don't want to find yourself in those scenarios versus this defense.
As you've talked with the coaches around the league and preparing for your games, I mean, not just with Sam Pittman, but just, all of them this year, I can't imagine the stress level. It's got to be exponentially greater this year, just trying to deal with the contingencies. And I'm thinking about Sam this week and not knowing what team he's going to be able to put out on the field because of contact tracing and the COVID numbers that's led to what we believe is going to be a loss of certain players. What's that been like going through those conversations you've had, and how are the coaches as a whole dealing with that this year in your assessment?
Yeah, they've done a lot of it. Well, we open up our questions. The standard opener is who's available this week. That's all. Let's get our depth chart right. Who can we expect to see? Who won't we see that we otherwise would have expected to see? Because now more than ever, usually, in the past, you could watch the previous week's game. You read some of the press conference transcripts, watch a couple of them, and the coaches will address injuries. And some of them are pretty cagey and others aren't. But you have a pretty good idea. You could specifically ask about certain players. You can't do that now. Now it just has to be, you got to kind of carpet bomb it, which is just a wide open, what do we got this week, Coach? I mean, is it who's going to be out there? Let us know who's going to be doing what. Can you tell us who might not be out there so that we're not going, my gosh, why are they starting so-and-so? Mm-hmm. Well, it's because the guy got contact traced or tested positive or whatever. These coaches, though, a lot of them, they did a lot of this as much as they could anyway in the preseason, cross-training guys, especially when you think about interchangeable positions, guys playing inside, outside linebacker, guys playing inside, out on in the secondary, safeties and corners. Safeties cross-training at nickel. Some of them, if they're a good size, they spend more time in the box. Maybe you rep more sub packages on defense where you've got extra DBs, but they're playing against regular personnel on offense, just because if you're down a couple of backers, maybe you find yourself living with more DBs out there and asking a safety or a big body DB to play in the box. That's kind of the measures that they've had to take. And we know that they've got guys out there playing sometimes on game day that haven't gotten a ton of preparation because they had to be held out of practice or were isolated due to contact tracing or positive tests as well, but they just can't afford to not have them out there on game day. So their preparation, we're seeing guys out there that are playing that aren't at their best simply because they weren't capable of preparing the way they normally would have, but the teams are saying, look, we'd rather have an unprepared this guy versus whoever the inexperienced or maybe deficient backup is, that was able to practice all week just because he's that good. That's happening across the league.
Matt Stinchcomb, former Georgia Bulldog and current SEC Network analyst here on the Morning Rush. Matt, two guys you really like on the Arkansas defense, Jonathan Marshall and Jalen Catalon. We'll start with the trenches first. Jonathan Marshall, he's second, I believe, in the SEC in pressures when it comes to getting the quarterback. What have you seen from him, and how much has he improved his draft stock heading into the end of college football season?
What I see is power. That guy's got some serious low-end torque. He just kind of Tonka trucks guys off the line of scrimmage. And he's not a real elusive guy. He's not a super quick, kind of twitchy guy that's just hard to get your hands on him. It's the opposite. It's do you really want to tangle with this dude? Because he's out in there just throwing bodies around. I mean, physically demonstrating how strong he really is, and understand he's probably the strongest guy on the team. He plays like it. He moves the line of scrimmage backwards. He takes on double teams really well, and then at the position that they ask him to play, which is oftentimes a head-up nose tackle alignment, where You can get a double team from either direction, but more than likely you are going to get a double team. It's not easy taking on 600-plus pounds of guys that are trying to make you go somewhere you don't want to go and winning. He does that a lot. It's been really impressive. He's a handful, there's no doubt. He's not a huge guy, but he plays much bigger than his stature would imply, that's for sure. And Catalan, I mean, what can you say? As early as he is in his career, not only a really good tackler around the football, he makes that defense right a lot of times. That's the role of the safety, is to fix whatever the 10 guys in front of them is doing, and to see if, in fact, I'm actually supposed to run the alley right here and run support, but we blew it and we lost contain, and so now I'm going to be the contain player. I mean, he's that kind of a football player, and you watch him make those kind of plays a lot. Really aware, and seems like he's got great ability as well. And you combine those two at safety, and you've got a really high productive football player. I think that's what we've seen out of Catalan, and the conference has recognized him, I think, a couple of times for some of his performances, rightfully so.
Matt, when you look at this LSU football team, all the pieces they lost, not only players but coaches as well. Arkansas opened as a 3-point favorite, and they were a 42-point underdog last year, and that's the largest betting line shift known in the history of college football. Have you ever seen a team coming off a national championship that has a drop-off like we've seen from LSU this year?
You got to go way back, and there's a few instances, although and we've got a graphic that's built around that. A lot of them, I think, happened in the 30s and 40s. Ohio State, I think, started the year off a national championship year 2 championships ago. And I think they started 3-3, finished 8-5, maybe. You just don't see it very often. And, they had the fewest number of returning starters of any other team in the country. So they had 5 guys from that national title team that started games in 19. And the level of talent that went to the NFL, where you've got 16 guys in the league, 14 drafted, 5 of them in the first round. It's not easy to just plug and play. Oh, and by the way, you've got we'll call it at least a half of a new offensive coordinator. Joe Brady, now the offensive coordinator at Carolina with the Panthers, and then you got a new defensive coordinator. All new faces effectively on the rug. A new quarterback, a young quarterback now with the Finley kid. As a true freshman taking snaps, most likely. You just think, at what point in time was it reasonable to expect that this football team was going to be competitive in all their games? Nobody thought that they were going to get thumped the way they did versus Mississippi State, especially the way Mississippi State has proven to play the balance of their games. However, when you put it into context and you look at what they actually returned, other than the uniforms and the names, it's basically a brand new football team.
Game often comes down to whose quarterback plays better. What's your assessment of Felipe Franks and where he is at through the games he's played so far? Is this a guy that's maybe ready next year to take that step and play professional football and look at the draft, or is this a guy that could serve himself well with another year of college football from what you've seen to this point?
Yeah, I'll say this, that there's no doubt that he's improved his draft stock. And we even heard a couple of games ago where, NFL scouts were starting to take notice of the way that he's playing. He's a great deep ball passer, and has demonstrated that. His arm strength is pretty impressive. And you could hear guys that are in and around that position, assessing that position. They've often thought that how well he throws the football. Accuracy could have improved, and it has. I think he's completing 71% of his passes last 4 times out. The efficiency that he's playing with is impressive. Even in the Auburn game, you could think, around about the second half, especially, that offense started to gain its footing versus what is still a pretty salty defensive unit, and he finds ways to make plays. And that's a big part of that position, where you just can't always draw it up to where it's going to win every time. You got a guy that can make you right after the ball is snapped. And I think that he's proven to do that with much greater consistency. There's no doubt it'd be fun, and selfishly, I'd love to see him come back for next year. And given the times that we find ourselves in, you have to wonder, how has that evaluation changed for players as far as, do I leave? Do I stay? What does the NFL look like? They conducted a draft, obviously, post-pandemic, post-COVID, and all that other. But the run-up to the draft wasn't impacted by it. And so you think, how does that change as far as how the league is going to go about evaluating players and how they'll even conduct their draft picks and evaluations preseason, how they're even capable of doing that. All that's got to be weighed in, I think, a player's decision. But I don't have to worry about all that. I just, as far as watching games and covering games, I'd love to see Felipe Franks in a Hogs uniform again next year.
Matt Stinchcomb, former Georgia Bulldog, and now an analyst at the SEC Network. Matt, we appreciate your insight this morning, and I know it's weird for you guys this season not traveling to games, but best of luck on the call tomorrow morning between the Razorbacks and the LSU Tigers.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me on.